For this model review, we are into the big leagues. It's the giant CC8800 crawler crane, complete with a massive boom booster, and it's in the colours of the Dutch specialist Mammoet. This model is made by Conrad, and it has the Mammoet model number of 410259. It comes in two very large boxes, and the total weight is 24 kilograms. But when it comes to a model like this, size does matter. The packaging style of both boxes is the same, and there's an outer sleeve that covers expanded polystyrene trays. Because the model parts are so heavy, the trays are strapped together. There's an assembly manual which we'll take a look at in a moment, but first we'll cut the straps, and that will let us take the lid off the top tray. In total there are 6 large trays of parts, and the packaging is very good. But as you can see from what's in front of you, you do need to create a fair bit of space in order to lay out the trays and build up the model. The model comes with a collector card, and that says there are 400 models in the series. Here's the manual, and it's got nice photos of different configurations on the outside and also diagrams on the inside. We then have annotated parts trays, and you need the annotations to use the instructions that follow. The first version of this model appeared around 2004, and it seems some of the instructions are reprinted from the earlier manual. But there are whole additional sections to deal with the boom booster, and they are generally helpful. But the printed version of the manual doesn't do the model justice. Firstly, it's got a number of errors in it, and it doesn't really describe how to build all of the different versions that are possible. And in that regard, the manual should be better. Okay, let's make a start with the assembly, and we start with the massive undercarriage. The engineering of these really large parts is good, and they fit together well. The manual shows the parts to use, although they're shown in the wrong place. But the K2 bolts recommended are hard to get in, and that's because of the cramped location, so it's much easier to use K4 bolts instead. So here the crossframe is assembled, and there are jacks you can use to jack it up for self-assembly. To fit the track frames we'll use the K2 bolts recommended, and it's easier if you clean out the bolt holes a little bit first. With the tracks on, there's some counterweight to add at each end, and that consists of a slot-in tray and 5 weights at each side. So already we've got something that's massive and heavy. So let's run a quick check on the weighbridge. And already we're over 8 pounds and nearly 4 kilograms. To give the Cranes etc. team something to walk on, we'll add on the walkway plates and ladder. And then the giant hand crane can lift in the main crane body. Because of the way the model has been engineered, you can't use all parts as transport loads because some are way too wide. And it would have been nice if every part could have been stripped down to a transport width. The crane body slots in and we need to secure it, and there's a screw that's provided for that purpose. And it needs to be done up tight enough so that the body doesn't rock when it comes under load. Actually, the system works well and the body rotates nicely. One thing you have to do is to put the rope on the rope drums, and that can be a time-consuming job. Here we've tied the rope onto one of the drums, and we just rig up a simple system to try and make it easier. We put the rope drum on a temporary axle, and with the rope tied off onto the winch drum, we can then start to wind it on. The model really needs a winch key with it, because without one you can try and use a powered solution, but it doesn't fit the winch axle properly, and it's one hell of a job to winch it all on by hand. Annoyingly, the manual is wrong as to which drum to put the rope on, and the one we've just been filling is for luffing the boom, and the drum for that is actually located on the back mast. That problem we'll sort out later, and in the meantime we add some plates that have to be fitted, and then we can add on the large cab and engine structure. Again, because all the walkways are fixed, it's too wide to make a transport load of it, but once it's located in place, it does fit on well. At this point there's some detail we can add, and that consists of hydraulic hoses which run to the winch drums. These are provided as peel-off parts, and you thread them into holes on the enclosure. This all works quite well and adds some nice detail. And here you can see the winch drums all hosed up. There are more hydraulic hoses which can be fitted to the back of the enclosure, and they get fed in through a hole on the body. Following the manual, the next step is to add the ballast tray on the back of the crane, and it pins in place. But from now on we'll deviate from the sequence in the manual, because to make the model easier to handle we won't add on the ballast carriage just yet. We'll move straight on to construct the back mast. Here are the pieces for it, and they're joined together using plastic bolts, and you have to peel each one off from a moulding sprue. So with the first 4 bolts ready, we'll join up the parts, and we'll make our first connection. Generally the parts line up well, although you may have some scraping off of paint. And before putting the bolts in, it's best to make sure the holes are properly lined up by using a screwdriver or something similar. The printed manual recommends using K1 bolts, but unfortunately this is a serious error. They are too small and just drop out, and would be dangerous if you used them on a fully built up model. In fact, the correct bolts to use are the thicker K5 bolts, and you will probably need to clean out the paint from the holes to make them fit. We can then insert the bolt, and you might need to use something to help push it in. Now these plastic bolts are Conrad's favoured system and they do work, but they can be difficult to get in and difficult to get out if you want to change the model. One of the improvements on this model compared to when it first came out is the addition of walkways. These are metal mesh and they clip into place, and depending on the situation, different clips go in different places. Some of the clips accommodate upstand posts, and these get used to hold a safety wire which stretches along the walkway. We'll see that later. With the backmast assembled, we're ready to fix it to the crane, and it slots in easily and pins into place with a rather overlong bolt, and that would look better if it was shorter. The pendant bars for the model come in 3 different lengths, and they are high-grade plastic which get pinned together. And here they're fixed to the backmast luffing gear. Because it's a solid part, it doesn't work as an equaliser. To reeve up the luffing gear, here we've rigged up a temporary support for the backmast, and this makes it much easier to do the rope reeving. The reeving is complicated because you need 2 equal lengths of rope, and here we've measured up 2 lengths off of the spooling drum. So you have to do 2 lots of reeving, and the ropes need to be the same length to keep the same tension. So the best way to do this is to reeve each half, and then feed 1 rope through each half of the winch drum. At this point you can check the lengths are equal and tie off the end knots accordingly. And now that we know we've got 2 equal lengths of rope, we can begin to carefully wind them on the winch drum. So as long as you're careful and don't let the rope bunch up too much on one drum or the other, you can reasonably maintain an equal tension in the ropes so that it all looks okay. One other point is that the manual says to use 2 lengths of rope 5 meters each. But that's not enough, because if you want to be able to lower the backmast, you need 2 lengths of 8 meters each. With the backmast on, we can then go back and place some more counterweight at the back of the crane. And in the middle there's a tray topped up with some weights. And we can begin to load up the ballast plate. To reeve up the luffing gear for the main boom, we take some rope off of the winch drum that's on the backmast. And fortunately, to make things easy, you can clip in the luffing bridle to the top of the backmast. And here you can see, quick as a flash, we've reeved up the luffing bridle. There's no specific tying off point, so we'll have to use the axle. And with that, we'll then move to the back and sort out the ballast carriage. Out of the box, there are plenty of jacks to fit, and these all get screwed into place. So you can support the ballast carrier on its tyres or on the jacks. To support the extended capacity of the boom booster, there's an extra lattice spacer which allows the ballast carrier to be pushed out further from the crane. And this metal part gets pinned in the usual way. Once the carriage is fixed, you can rotate it with the crane, and we can get on and load it up with weights. Now we move on to assemble the main boom, and one part that's not fixed out of the box is an extra winch drum. And if you want the model to look its best, it's worth winding on some of the excess rope, rather than having it just empty. Offering up the main boom to the crane means manoeuvring some heavy metal, but again the model engineering is very good and the parts fit together well. Again, before fitting any bolts, it's best to make sure the holes are lined up by using a suitable tool. And that makes getting the bolt in easy. We move on to perhaps the most impressive part of the model, and that is the boom booster. It comes as a number of separate parts that have to be bolted together, and in that way it replicates the real boom booster, which would be too big to transport fully assembled. The good news for the model is that the parts are really well made because they fit together very nicely. The final part to fit is a walkway section, and it's a friction clip onto the black frames, so you need to make sure that the black frames have been oriented in the same direction. There are 5 booster sections like this, and a triangle one at each end, and they are extremely strong and all made of metal. So much so that the complete boom booster is heavy, and to check that out we'll put it on the trusty Cranes etc. weighbridge. And that tells us that the full boom booster section weighs 4 kilograms or nearly 9 pounds. At the top of the boom is a heavy lift head, and unfortunately the lift frames on the lift head were assembled upside down by Conrad in the factory. The tying off point should be at the bottom, so the frames had to be reversed. Next comes the most painful part of the model, and that's reeving up the hook. The model comes with a big double hook assembled, and here we're hanging it from the boom head by chains, and each half of the hook block has to be reeved up with lines from separate winch drums. As you can see here, the pulleys are squeezed together by bits of paper, and that's done to try and prevent the rope bouncing off the pulleys. Expect to be swearing a few times when you reeve the hook. The last assembly to do is to run the safety line on the walkways, and it's supplied as one long length of wire that has to be cut. That's not very friendly for different configurations, so here we've wound up the excess at one end to avoid having to cut it. Let's look at some of the details we've not already mentioned, and the crawler track pads have got nice indentations in the casting, and the track frames are of a suitable heavy construction. There's some finer detailing on the inside of the track frames. The access stairs are metal and there's a textured surface on top. The cab windows have got the windscreen wipers moulded, but a touch of black paint would have made them look better. The detailing on the inside of the big cab is fairly simple, and on the outside of the cab there's a beacon light and Mammoet graphic. The walkways outside are metal, and it's good to see some small graphics detailing, including what looks like a fleet number. The ballast extender has nice tubular chords, and the big ballast carriage is impressive but simple. The large tyres look good and there is plastic detailing of the wheels, but there's no access platforms or ladders on the carriage itself. All of the counterweight blocks have nice chevron graphics. The colour match of the plastic parts such as these ram jackets is very good, but one thing that does stick out are the grey bolts, and it's a pity Conrad did not make them black for this model. An improvement on this model compared to the first version is the use of metal pulleys, but not so good at the black boom ends. The black has been overpainted onto the red and it's not good quality. It comes off easily and it's best to be aware you'll get some on your fingers and you don't want it on your clothes. The model has Terex nameboards to reflect when the real machine was purchased. Let's start by having a look at the big crawler track frames. They are very heavy, but rolling the tracks by hand is quite easy, and the tension is maintained by the usual spring loading. The tracks also have working rollers, top and bottom. Of course, one possibility for a model like this is to display parts as transport loads, and there are plenty of opportunities for that, but you'd need a huge number of trucks to show it all. It is also possible to show the boom booster parts on a truck. The real sections break down even smaller, but in the model world you can show them as slightly oversized transport loads. Another transport option is to show the crane being transported part assembled, as seen in this photo. To replicate this, we'll use parts from another Mammoet model, which is the SPMT converter exchange project. Here we've coupled up the SPMTs in a similar looking arrangement to the photo, and to provide back propping to the counterweight tray, we'll use parts of the jacking towers from the converter exchange project model. With that done, we have an interesting and unusual way to display the CC8800. One small feature is the sliding cab door, and at the other end of the scale the counterweight carriage moves nicely with its heavy load. If the crane needs to track to a different location, you can rotate the counterweight carriage axles. And then when they're in line, the crane can pull the counterweight carriage along as it tracks to a new position. Perhaps the best part of this model is all the different configurations that can be assembled. We start with just a standard configuration of a normal boom, and just to make it a little bit more interesting, we'll put a load on. Although this particular load is from the Converter Exchange project, so it's not really a realistic lift, and the rigging is certainly something only the cranes etc. bodgers could come up with. With a model like this though, you really want to go large, so here it is rigged with a main boom and a partial configuration of the boom booster. And the configuration you can see here is far from the biggest that you can build with all of the parts in the box. There are other configurations available, and for those we'll split down the large hook block. It can be disassembled by removing the large plastic pins, and then you separate one half of the block. The hook also has to be separated, and that's rather more tricky to do. So here we're gently trying to prise the side plates apart, while at the same time we twist the hook out. The hook can then be slotted into the separate pulley block to form a smaller hook block. With that we also need to change the arrangement at the boom head, and here we've removed the two pulley blocks and repinned one back in a central position. So here we've now formed a fixed strut jib, but bear in mind that unloaded it will want to go backwards. The strut jib should be at an angle of 15 degrees. So to check that we've got that, here's a template. The triangle's drawn with sides of 150 and 42, and that gives us the 15-degree angle. So here the pen line is lined up with the boom, and the edge of the sheet indicates a 15-degree angle. Perhaps the most impressive configuration of the model is with a luffing fly jib, and it's also the most complicated arrangement to build. Another one of the weaknesses of the manual is that there are no instructions showing you how to build the fly jib, and therefore there's nothing showing the reeving arrangements. The way the luffing rope has been run is from winch drum number 2 up and down the back mast, and then out and up to the first luffing jib strut. The rope then runs inside the strut to get to the pulleys at the end. So here it is shown as reeved on the model. The rope comes up into the inner end of the strut and then passes through inside the strut. And if you take the rope out in the right place at the end, you can avoid the rope touching the lattice work. It then goes to the pulleys and you can reeve up the luffing ropes. As you can see, this is a very large model, so let's give some dim check information. And firstly, on the ground with the ballast carriage extended, you need about 30 inches or 77 centimetres. But how high can it go? Well, you need lots of space for the tallest configuration. It stands at around 10'6" or 325 centimetres. It's amazing to think that the first version of this model came out in 2004. This is a much improved version. The detail level is not the highest, but you do get a very strong and robust model. The manual is not the best and it's not a cheap model, but you do get a lot for the money, so it is good value. And its big plus point is the flexibility. If you're looking for a jaw-dropping model, this one is excellent.